Good morning again, everybody, and welcome back for our sixth of six modules over our 3 days. And the last of the six is from someone I worked with 20 years ago and have kept in touch on and off with since, Richard Hewitt. His company Thrive, and he's going to talk through thinking in three horizons, which hopefully gives us some food for thought on what do we do next and how do we bounce back better. But Richard, without further ado, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. And good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you, but of course, I can't see you. But I'm imagining that you're a terrific looking audience, and that'll get us going. I'm sitting at home in Nottinghamshire, where I've been for the last 10 weeks, like many others, I'm sure. But I'm imagining that we're in a really nice conference venue somewhere exotic to help me along as well. Most of what you've covered so far in the preceding presentations has been firmly rooted in fact, convention, and quite often even the law. And this is where things might get a bit more complex. I want to talk to you about how you and your organizations think about the future. And let's face it, now is as good a time as any to do so. All of what I'm going to say is valid for teams and organizations pre or post pandemic, but I'll try to sharpen my focus where I can on the period of crisis response that we're all in the midst of right now. First things first, please allow me to share a little technique I've used for years. I think buzzwords and buzz phrases that emerge in times of chaos or crisis are useful little indicators of how people are trying to frame their experience as they respond to what's going on in front of them. There are a few of them going around at the moment. You may have heard them. The new normal, build back better, and even bounce beyond. I'm intrigued by these little sayings. What are we really trying to get at by using these phrases? And how might we think better about the massive uncertainty that faces us all right now? Let's face it, we're all staring straight down the barrel into a very uncertain future right now. So planning for your organization's resilience just got far more complex and possibly more important than ever. But before we get into all of that, please allow me to introduce myself properly and tell you a little bit more about my background. I guess the photographs you can see on the screen cover all the main points of my journey so far. My first career comprised 20 years in the Army, serving on operations all over the world and culminating in command of a high readiness airborne unit. Then, in a bid to keep the adrenaline levels high, I spent almost 5 years in local government, primarily as a director of transformation for a large local authority in the southeast of England. And around 10 years ago, I made the jump into management consultancy. And my business partner and I run our own outfit, Thrive, which has operated up and down the length of the UK for the last 10 years. We get involved in leadership and strategy development and system change. I guess an easy way to describe what we do is to say that we help organizations change their business models to better fit the future they face. Here's a picture of us doing our stuff. It's a photograph of a session we ran as part of a project called The Lives We Lead in Suffolk. It doesn't really matter what's going on in the photo, but it's a hell of an angle to get a picture from, I thought. Anyway, how do I plan to talk to you about the future this morning? I'd like to introduce you to a model that I have used with clients for a number of years now. It's called the Three Horizons, and it was first developed by two men called Bill Sharp and Tony Hodgson. Tony is a founding member of the International Futures Forum, based in Scotland. He is currently a tutor of mine, and I have worked alongside him on a few occasions in the last decade. The Three Horizons model offers a context for transformative innovation. And I think it can help us a great deal at present by enabling us to perceive potential futures through lenses that exist in the present. Now, I realize that could sound a bit scary, But before we get into the model, let me show you what it looks like when we use it for real. There you go. It's nothing worse than Post-it notes and Sharpies, which are now, incidentally, my weapons of choice. It's also how we engage with teams and get them into the model. We're able to use it in a light way, usually in an introductory phase of a change project. But it's a framework that is capable of reaching huge depths in terms of an organization's approach and attitude to change. We also use it as a continual guide to the transformative processes we lead and facilitate. It's worth noting at this stage that this is a model that you can take away and use immediately. The primary utility of the model is that it has the potential to create valuable space where an organization can think about the future while sitting in the context of the current crisis. And I think that's quite heavily relevant right now. In fact, in our experience and over the years of using this model, it has invariably changed the language people use when talking about the future. Now, I'm sorry to do this to you while it's still so early in the day, but we're going to get a bit graphy for the rest of the presentation. Above all, what I'm trying to cover in this presentation is about foresight, and foresight is beyond planning. So I'm going to start with a good old 2x2 matrix, and again, I apologize, I realize it's your second of the morning. This is what's called the 4 modes of foresight, and it describes how perceiving the future requires some form of strategic thinking, depending on how effective your business is at shaping the market or context it operates within, and the level of uncertainty it faces. You can see the 2 axes, the horizontal and the vertical, both running from low to high, with the horizontal looking at the uncertainty that you are facing, and the vertical looking at your agency to shape the market, your organization's ability to create effects. If we're thinking about low agency and low uncertainty, we're thinking about forecasts and plans, extrapolations from analysis of the past. This makes me think of large local authorities who are delivering public services, designing and delivering services that use data from the past to predict a relatively stable future. Well, that was up until 10 weeks ago, obviously. If we're thinking about high agency and low uncertainty, we're in the territory of roadmaps, organizations who have the ability to shape their future. I'm thinking of successive generations of a product in an established manufacturing enterprise. What springs to mind for me here is the iPhone. It continues to dominate a very lucrative market by releasing successive models. In terms of high uncertainty and low agency, scenario planning comes into play. Oil and gas companies, and I'm aware that we have a range of representatives from the oil and gas sector in the audience. Oil and gas companies have had a long tradition of operating in this quadrant. Indeed, Shell used to be the global leader on scenario planning. The big players in the oil and gas market possess high agency in the location and production of oil, but low agency in how the world consumes energy. Thus, they face uncertainty and scenario planning by creating multiple possible futures and putting some of their strategy into each of those futures is how they cope. But how can we create the conditions to situate our strategic thinking to deal with where we find ourselves today, faced with hyper-turbulence? How can we create the conditions in our organizations for dialogue and activities that try to reveal the emergent pathways of transformation that get us from where we are right now to a future that we're able to adapt to and thrive within? How can we get our critical thinking into the top right quadrant? The 3 Horizons framework, which I want to talk to you about, sets out to facilitate that process. More graphs, but don't worry, I'll help you through. Let's have a detailed look at the model itself. Again, 2 axes, horizontal and vertical, with the horizontal axis being time. On the vertical axis, we're looking at your organization, your business, your company, your team's strategic fit with the changing environment. How well is your organization dealing with the challenges being thrown at it? Now, let me introduce each horizon. And there's a reason here which I hope will become clear from my introduction, going from Horizon 1 to Horizon 3 to Horizon 2, as opposed to 1, 2, 3. It may be down to the fact I'm Irish. Horizon 1 represents what you can see around you today. If you're sitting at this point on Horizon 1, considering that vertical axis is now, that's where we are. Horizon 1 is about viability. How viable is an organization set against the shifting context it faces if it continues to operate in the same pattern as time unfolds? For the purposes of the model, that viability is considered to degrade over time because of an increasing mismatch with continually changing external conditions. So that's why Horizon 1 over time degrades. Again, if we think of some pre-pandemic examples, an easy one would be the decline of Woolworth. It just didn't change quickly enough. More relevant to today, maybe the current challenges being faced by Primark as it attempts to come out of lockdown restrictions with no online offer might be more relevant. Now, with the shadow of COVID-19 looking like it's here for some time to come, we're seeing a new H1 being rapidly established. This, to me, gets closer to the real meaning of a new normal. H3 then. H3 represents a different, transformed way of working that learns to cope far better with the changing external conditions, and so rises over time to become the new dominant viable pattern. A good example in the corporate world of the rapid rise of H3 is that of Airbnb, a company that changed global patterns of behavior and one whose fundamental business model looks to be resilient enough to face what might be coming. Finally then, in the introduction to these, Horizon 2. H2 represents the turbulent and often chaotic situation of transition from one pattern to another. So, what do these three horizons look like in detail? What does it feel like to be in H1? H1 looks very much like business as usual. But as time unfolds, it begins to feel like the dominant system is becoming unfit and is unable to change its patterns of behavior rapidly enough to keep pace with external challenges. When this is happening, the dominant pattern tends to be held in place by policies and rules. Policies and rules that have worked fine for what could have been a long time. Expertise can become a glue that holds strategic focus on what has worked in the past, not what's going to work in the future. Specialization can look inch wide and mile deep and can turn into a pattern of behavior that might not form a coherent and resilient whole. Culture and the resultant power dynamics can become unflexible and solidified. It can feel like the power of the few over the many. We've all heard the quote, "That's just the way things are done around here." There's a little bit of the culture that we're talking about behind that. Organizations where H1 is dominant can look and feel machine-like. We typically use machine-like diagrams to represent organizations, but we know that that's not how they really work. I've been handed many organizational diagrams or organograms by chief executives to tell me how their organization works. But I and you know that organizations are merely a collection of relationships, and it's the relationships that makes them work. A common pattern in H1 is to make plans that retain control. And this can keep happening right up to the end. Look at what happened to Carillion. It could be argued that a powerful corporate and controlling culture of greed and recklessness led to its dramatic downfall. What about the third horizon? H3, if you were able to spot it, because bear in mind right now H3 is well below the plane of vision, because we're caught up in what's happening in H1. But if you're able to spot it, it looks like emerging change. It's probably not easy to define it right now, but it could be the new pattern of behavior that takes your organization out of the current crisis and beyond. H3 really is about building back better and bouncing beyond. However, for H3 to stand any chance of taking hold in its early stages, it needs the beginning of a culture change. H3 is fundamentally about learning, and that means being prepared to relinquish the stance that acts knowingly because of expertise or experience. In H3, the game has changed. H3 can grow and develop at speed because it thrives on integration and collaboration. Organizations within which this is happening quickly become aware of the value of collective intelligence and move to a much more flexible and less hierarchical pattern of decision making. We can all think of the new wave of working cultures heralded by the likes of Google as examples of this. But as an ex-military commander, I'm thinking more about the kind of transformative adaptability that General Stanley McChrystal writes about in his book, Team of Teams. For me, H3, when it really takes hold, looks and operates like mission command at its very best. The organization riding this horizon behaves like a living system, relentlessly networking throughout its operating environment in order to learn. Finally then, Horizon 2. H2 is about innovation. And let's face it, in organizational cultures, some or many will perceive any innovation to be disruptive. Crucially, H2 is the period of transition that can provide the bridging from the rigid world of H1 to the transformative world of H3. But it's worth remembering that H2 is not entirely dismissive of the way things get done right now. It's more focused on a new approach. H2 seeks to regenerate the valuable elements of an organization's patterns of behavior, whilst at the same time identify the new patterns that are going to work in the future. Then build the staff participation and creativity that helps teams become greater than the sum of their parts. This is what we call repatterning. But we need a word of caution here. Not all innovation is going to break the ties with the old way of doing things and lead to new patterns of the future. H2 plus is the good stuff. Pattern changing ways of working that begin to define a new business model, one that's fit to face the future ahead. H2 minus, on the other hand, will lead to snapback, a reversion back to the old ways of working. So, in the post-pandemic world, what are the implications here for your organizational resilience? Is the resilience you're focusing on now going to be a part of how you do things in the future? For instance, is simply getting everyone in an organization able to operate from home online a sustainable way of working to meet the challenges ahead? Those are questions just for consideration. I don't have the answers, but I'm looking at what's happening around me and how I'm doing business compared to 10 weeks ago. A quick word on time. It's worth remembering that at any given moment in time, all three horizons are present to a greater or lesser extent. It might not feel like it, but H3 is in the room with you right now. Well, it might not be in the room that you're in, but it's present in your organization or your team. That means new patterns of behavior that are going to get your business or your organization or your team from what it's experiencing now to where it needs to be in the future are being thought about and perhaps even talked about right now. You just need to find a way to create the conditions within which they're able to grow and take your organization from T1 through T2 to T3. But for most organizations, as I speak, this is probably more how like the new normal feels to them right now. Most of us are currently adrift in the zone of dilemma navigation. In other words, trying to do the strategic thinking that we will need to survive and thrive, but concurrently being buffeted by the conditions of hyperturbulence that are existing at all levels. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the crazy zone. And this is where resilience really matters. How does your organization balance its investment, both intellectually and financially, in the future, H2+, whilst at the same time focus on survival, H2-. Finally then, a quick word on mindsets. When we go into an organization, we're interested in working with people in order to surface, share, and usually change their mindset. System change for us begins with changing the relationships that exist between people. Those relationships are born of mindset. What does a typical picture of relationships and perceptions look like in an organization right now? There will be a significant number of people who want things to go back to the way they were, and they believe firmly that they will. This is the H1 component of your organization, and they are sitting there looking at H2 with all of their innovations as being a very risky business. If they are regarding people who are talking the language of H3, they're probably just considering that to be irrelevant. Too far-fetched is the phrase. There'll also be those in your organization who are convinced that in order to survive and go on to thrive, innovation will be critical. This is the H2 component. They might well regard the H1 component as being obstructive, sticking to the past, unable to see the future and the innovations that could get you there. But they're also maybe looking at those H3 component as impractical. The changes that they are espousing are just too much. But there could be a few in your organization who already have a good handle on what the future looks like, and they are your H3 component. They regard H1 as dinosaurs, I'm afraid, because they're too far behind in their thinking. And they might well look at H2 as being compromised by wanting to regard the past as valuable. If you look at this as a collection of perceptions, the relationships that exist between the components aren't always representative of what I would call a healthy system. So this is a picture where horizon negative mindsets dominate. And that creates a vicious cycle of relationships. In our practice at Thrive, it's our intent and purpose in an organization to shift these mindsets from negative to positive perspectives. We seek to create the conditions that turn vicious patterns of culture and behavior into virtuous ones. And we do that using dialogue. The dialogue that we seek to generate in organizations is the technology of system change. As we continue to face the daily challenges of dealing with the effect of this global event, how do we create the space to think about the future? I hope this brief look at how we in Thrive approach the future has given you something to think about. And of course, I'm very happy to field any questions or comments you might have, but I'm also happy for you to contact me directly if you want any further information. And there's my email address on the bottom right of that slide of a little girl in Felixstowe Beach, again, part of one of the projects that we've done in the past.
Richard, thank you for your 30 minutes there of high protein thought-provoking stuff. And it just struck me, how many times have we been in a meeting where we've been fobbed off with a "that'll never work" type comment? And I'm not saying that for a second I'm an H3 person and proud of it, but we've all been there with that option that you look back and go, oh, actually that was quite clever, that was quite good. And perhaps it fits in with Stu Wallace's piece earlier on about decision making and management biases of we think what people will perceive is acceptable or not acceptable without necessarily pushing it. And it also struck me from my experience of emergency response and incident management rooms, perhaps tying back to some of the earlier ones. When I first started in this world about 10 years ago in the commercial world, handwritten whiteboards with people slavishly filling it out. And there were an awful lot of people that looked at the digital whiteboards and said, oh, no, I like to have it by hand so that I can see it and I understand it. And then we went to, well, we can actually have a camera in the room so that people can join remotely. And we now look, and actually, because of the pandemic, and we can't go to our incident management rooms, the ability for a digital solution was the way ahead. And that if they had been adopted, which most people have now, it would have been a step forward. So even in my experience, you can retrospectively think about those three horizons really clearly. If anyone has got a question that they want to ask, Dick, please do add it to the chat. But while we're just doing that, let me just perhaps start off the thought process, because we do have a couple of minutes. You talk about thinking and strategy and so on. I just wonder, in this world that we're in at the moment, there's an awful lot of people fighting fires and trying to run very fast to stand still. And is the idea of thinking about strategy, perhaps a little bit of a luxury now? When do you think we should be engaging in this process?
Well, I'm very conscious that the sort of thinking that I have just talked about can feel like a luxury, and I can understand how a lot of people would feel that way. I mean, let's face it, right now, a lot of us are in the business of avoiding collapse, and that has to be done. And that is a part of the first horizon that we need to attend to. We need to keep the lights on. We need to keep the wages paid. That's absolute. But we also need to maybe just create a little bit of space for us to step back and think about, is our business model viable? As we start to come out of restrictions, as the world tries to return to the new normal, whatever that might be, are we going to be able to function as we want to? Are we going to be able to make decisions that are facing those challenges? And I think the plea that I would make here would be that you need to keep an eye on the future in order to make a planned and coherent transition to what you're going to do next. Most of us don't know exactly what we're going to be doing, possibly even a short timescale is 3 to 6 months away. But if we can start to think about the future in a coherent way, which I think the Three Horizons offers a really good opportunity to do so, then you can start to think about, so if I'm going to make a transition to what that looks like, and it might not be dramatic, but then you're having the right conversations and the right dialogue with people in your team or your organization that are going to make the decisions actually fit to face the future. There'll be a lot of people in organizations who think that's not really relevant for me. But bear in mind that every decision that people make in your organization today is influenced by what they think the future is going to look like. So my advice would be to get those thoughts out in the open, start talking to people about what they think the future is going to look like, because that's how they're making decisions right now. So the H1 and the H3 are absolutely intertwined. It's about exposing the space to get that dialogue going and to make H2 a planned and less chaotic transition.
Okay, brilliant. And all of that actually ties in nicely with Joanna and Bonnie's piece about your stakeholders. In this case, your stakeholders are your staff, they're your clients. What does the future look like? What do they expect? How do they want to do it? And that engagement and collaboration to embrace good ideas from wherever they may be. But at the same time, the senior leadership team, I guess, ultimately have to work out what is a viable commercial opportunity. So thank you for all of that. Obviously his information is there at the bottom. So if you wish to engage direct, please do. The importance in this world is we don't know the answer to everything. As in Varroy, we know that there are other experts out there that we like to work with, and where that's appropriate, like today, we'll introduce them to anyone that we think can benefit from. So in this regard, if you think Richard can be of use to you and it's worth a conversation further, please get in touch with him. No need to come through me, because that just slows down the communications and adds confusion. If you want to speak to Dick, get on the email and give him a call. But that concludes our 6 modules and our 3 days. Thank you so much for your engagement over that period. Some of you I know have been with us throughout, some have dropped in and out. And for all those that have stuck for where are we, 4.5 hours of Inverroy information, thank you. If you've enjoyed it, brilliant. If you thought it's got some value, please do have a look at the Just Giving page and make a donation, whether it's £5, £50, whatever it is that you feel it's worth. That would be fantastic and go towards a great cause. You would expect me to say this at the end of some time with Inverroy. If there's anything out there that you think we can do to support you and your organisation, please do get in touch. We'd love to get involved wherever that might be. But for now, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you to David, who's pulled all this together as Inverroy's facilitator and coordinator. And we will be back in touch in a few weeks' time with our next series of seminars and presentations. If you'd like to join us, we look forward to seeing you then. But for now, to Richard, Joanna and Bonnie, thank you for today. And to the team, thank you for the 3 days. Thanks and goodbye.